Thank you very much, Yan Chao. And I'd really like to thank, although Philip Yuan is not here tonight, I'd like to thank Philip Yuan and the Digital Futures team for the invitation to come to Digital Futures again and to Tongji. It's always really so special to be here. Every time I do come, it fills me with inspiration. And it's really such a wonderful school, and the event is so amazing. The participants are excellent, and it's really great to be here. Thank you very much. My talk titled Generative Urban Intelligence is focused across these four subtopics or chapters of my talk. One could say that urban intelligence has evolved from the early paradigms of centralized control and techno-optimism within an era of cybernetics that I think Sam Joyce will be talking about much more eloquently than I can. And we've headed in recent years more towards adaptive and responsive and a contested notion of urbanism. Today we face a truly accelerated phase of AI-driven urbanism, where generative tools, data infrastructures, and new governance models are reshaping how we imagine, how we design, and how we inhabit cities. The future of intelligent urbanism depends not only on totalizing systems, but on critical, plural, and open processes. I'd like to prioritize in this talk issues of adaptability, and the notion of a kind of planetary urbanism. Rather than solving problems of the city, the work that I'll show today and the kind of argument or thesis is to learn to navigate complexity with tools that are both computationally powerful and also socially grounded. My talk, as it's subdivided into these 4 Ps, I'll be showing work from my practice, Ocean CN, which was founded in Hong Kong and is now based in New York, and student work and research from my institution, my current institution, New York Institute of Technology, where I'm a professor and former associate dean, from the AA, from my long past, from a little bit from UPenn, and also from my near past, Hong Kong U, and also some past Digital Futures work which I think is relevant within this context. The first topic, paradigms. Every technological revolution begins with a shift in a worldview. Generative AI is transforming not only the way we use, but the way we conceive of cities themselves. My work has long explored the paradigms that shape urban thought and design, and I hope to trace today an evolution in response to new technologies, new forms of knowledge, and changing societal aspirations. Thomas Kuhn wrote about paradigms in the 1960s, about paradigm shifts, and he writes, scientific revolutions are inaugurated by a growing sense that an existing paradigm has ceased to function adequately. He talks about paradigms being not linear, that paradigm A is followed by paradigm B, but that there's a shift and an overlap between them. And I think we're truly in an era that exists. Backing up to really the beginning of computation, this is Charles Babbage's difference engine. It was a mechanical machine that could compute very simple mathematics, but faster than the human mind. Fast forwarding a few decades to IBM, International Business Machines, as it was initially called. Their slogan was, from 1911, think. And Apple, in the early days of Apple, had a slogan called Think Different, which refers back to that early paradigm. And the paradigm of intelligence sorry, that's gone very quickly. Ecology, economy, urbanism, and computation. Sorry, that's on some automatic transition. Within the context that any discussion of urbanism, certainly where we are in Shanghai, this is called the Yuxi Circle. There's a city in China, in Western China, called Yuxi. And if you draw a circle of a certain diameter, over half the population of the world is within this circle. And I think this context of megacities and terminology that we don't even know how to name, so there's lots of ambient light. This is a diagram of Jingjingji, Beijing, and its kind of satellite of Tianjin and many other cities around Hebei, the Yangtze River Delta, and the Greater Bay Area of southern China. Questions I would like to ask rhetorically are, how do intelligent systems impact urbanism? To what extent is urbanism a model of complexity and intelligence? And how do we define urban intelligence? In a book that I authored and edited, Master Planning the Adaptive City, which is truly a paradox because master planning is far from adaptive. It's teleological and trying to find an end solution. And adaptivity is far from seeking a single solution. It looks at the potential for transformation and change. This was published in 2013, and I think that the world within which we're working as designers in the media that we're working in today has progressed to the point where we really are able to focus on the multiplicity of possible solution spaces. And I think more than ever, we are in an era where we need the plasticity of thought and of technique. Another paradigm that I configured around a series of authors and projects was a guest-edited AD titled Mass Customized Cities, which raised questions of what happens when we scale up the techniques of fabrication this was in 2014, the techniques of fabrication that were becoming embedded within the architect's toolbox. What happens when we scale that up to the scale of the city? Not so much a paradigm, but maybe a 12-year era of the Shanghai Visiting School at the AA, which I directed for 12 years, which very interestingly began here in Tongji, in, I think, Building C over there, in the very first year. These are posters of the Shanghai Summer School. We had a lot of association and relationship to the early years of DigitalFUTURES, a lot of overlap between people and issues, and each year had a theme. And as the years progressed, we can kind of see the evolutionary urbanism, adaptive city, urban formation, customized cities. There was sort of my own kind of interest sort of imprinted onto this. And then we get to eventually City Smart and Urban Intel. This is between 2007 and 2018. And it was almost forecasting the era of AI. We were beginning to work with very primitive GANs models and such. And in my own work and practice and teaching, there are a number of paradigms that I've focused on and championed. One is parametric urbanism, which we formulated at the Architectural Association in the Design Research Lab from 2005 to 2009. I taught at the AA from 96 till 2009. And parametric urbanism brought the tools of parametric architecture, of beginning to investigate the capacity to harness complexity and focus on the scale of the city. The adaptive city, as I referred to of the book, addresses the ways in which the city and its designers and policymakers can manage, forecast, and usher in change, understanding the city fundamentally as in transformation, always in transformation, and asking how designers can engage and guide adaptations and evolutions of the city. And of mass customized cities, confronting standardization and homogeneity, seeking the potential of specificity and differentiation at the scale of urbanism. And I think that these three capacities, to harness complexity, to usher in evolutionary change and to guide evolutionary change, and to aim towards specificity and differentiation, I believe are the properties of an intelligent urbanism. I'm less interested in the smart city and all of its ethical dilemmas than I am in how designers can access new tools to harness complexity, work within an evolutionary model, and focus on the heterogeneity of cities. This is a matrix or a list of various paradigms from the early 20th century into the 21st. And the ones in bold are the ones that I could say that I've attempted to make a contribution towards. This is perhaps how those four paradigms relate to the list of paradigms through the 20th and 21st century. And I'd like to maybe shift to paradigms that are focused through publishing. The last 3 years, I've published 3 books. The one on the right is going into print next week, and The Urbanism Reader, which I think is the most relevant to urban paradigms. It's a book published by Bloomsbury last year, co-authored with my old colleague and dear friend, Stéphane Al. It was an idea over the COVID pandemic to investigate the texts of urbanism. We were frustrated in that we were doing some work together and we didn't have a reader collecting seminal texts over the last over the era since, say, modernism, about the last 60 years or so. Texts which emphasized the pre-digital and digital era. This is what Tom Daniel writes about the book in a review recently, that the book is less a definitive canon than it is a provocation, a reminder that the need for design techniques and political principles adequate to the complexities of contemporary urban life. To that extent, this book seeds not only as pedagogy, but as a disciplinary self-reflection. Collecting 45 texts across 10 chapters, spatial heterogeneity, diversity and difference after modernist planning, urbanism and models of design complexity, intensities, flows, connectivity and network urbanism, density, the compact city and metropolitan culture, ecology, resilience and green infrastructure. Chapter 6, health, equity and livable cities. Number 7, emergent tactical and informal urbanism, evolutionary, computational and parametric urbanism, and virtuality, extended realities in the metaverse, and perhaps the most difficult chapter to introduce and author, we wrote about the texts, was chapter 10, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and technological determinism. Secondly, patterns in an urban sense can be defined less by isolated objects than by dynamic patterns of interaction where intelligence emerges through relationships across space, time, and data. From the history of urbanism to today's unprecedented capacity to analyze, simulate, and generate complex urban patterns, this shift is fundamentally transforming how we understand and design cities. Stan Allen, in his seminal article From Object to Field, writes about how form matters, but not only much the forms of things as the forms between things. And so as a shift from an understanding of architecture as an object to urbanism as a field, the notion of pattern becomes essential. and I think it always has been essential. These diagrams of ideal cities in the reign of Pope Sixtus V from 1580-something onwards, models of defensive architecture are in effect a form of parametric urbanism through one criteria, the defense of small European cities. And each has a pattern that's related to its kind of functionality of defense. The Noli plan of Rome, which can be understood as the relationship of the black figural spaces of solids architecturally to the open spaces, and of course within Rome the interiors of churches became open space. This as a method of patterning, as we'll see in a little while, has been essential in my recent work. Even Le Corbusier, when he proposed to obliterate 3 square kilometers of Paris, used the figure ground of the Noli plan as his media for diagramming his proposal of the Ville Radieuse. And within science, the notion of recognizing pattern as the registration, sorry, that was meant to kind of stop at some point. And within digital futures, I've focused in my workshop 3 years ago, and also in this week, on the notion of pattern cross-referencing urbanism, scientific patterns, and the graphics of visual culture. This is one matrix from 2023, more detail of that matrix, and this is some of the patterns that were generated in 2023. Upstairs in Building D, we're doing a similar process, kind of moving on a little bit from 2023, and we'll be outputting the work through digital models, renderings, 3D prints, beyond the kind of generative 2D plethora of multiplicities. This is looking at them a little bit more in larger detail. They become more than ideograms. They are the generative spaces within which the latency of a three-dimensional form gets developed and modeled. We're currently in a stage where this is truly exciting, but it's also limited to 2D. I'll show one project that I worked on as an invited competition for Digital and Smart City in East Hangzhou, in Zhejiang province, east of Hangzhou. We're invited to the first phase. We didn't make it into the second. It called for a strategic and infrastructural plan. We did a little bit more than a plan. We looked at the infrastructure, the spaces that could be built, and then we made a preliminary proposal. But we mashed up Chinese cities, and we were trying to focus on what makes the Chinese city of the infrastructural planning, the hierarchy between the kind of mega block and the kind of grain within the cities. These are mashups between Hangzhou, Shenzhen, Beijing, Shanghai, and looking at the kind of moire figure and field of the interference patterns of radial circles as a kind of mode in which to begin to transform and seeking outcomes that would be relevant for the city that carry forward some of those properties. And within a matrix, what's interesting, what starts to happen, and it's difficult to truly explain what happens within a diffusion model, but we'd start to get tendencies. So we looked, after creating hundreds of patterns, that we'd start to get tendencies of different types of pattern with different cities, and we began to reorganize these and selected some of them as having consistent qualities. And then going through a process, which we're doing upstairs as well in the digital futures, to go from the 2D to the 3D and to treat the model also as a quite plastic condition. And we did this with the terminology is from the competition, e-fashion town. And some of these develop very particular Chinese characteristics of furniture and screen carvings and such, or field conditions related perhaps to Jasper Johns in 3D. And then each of these models is recombined into what was a preliminary proposal. I've never gone back to kind of develop this further into a second stage, but I think the time is right for that. I'd like to go back a little bit to one particular project at Hong Kong U. This was in 2010. The studio was called Forgetting Macau, not because of forgetting Macau in any sort of sense, but what happened in the development of the Cotai Strip, the artificial island where all the casinos are, is that the traditional urbanism of Macau was forgotten. Instead, the ubiquity of the Las Vegas casino. And in this time, 2 years after the global financial crisis, the Cotai Strip was lots of cranes left empty and lots of building sites on hold. And it was an opportunity to look at the patterns of Macau and to see how the Cotai Strip could be developed, the remaining sites of the Cotai Strip could be developed with a dense, pedestrian-focused, grounded urbanism, albeit in a very different kind of formal and morphological logic than the rest of the city. I bring up this project because I think it was an instance where the sampling of the existing patterns of the city were embedded into the formation of the organization of the project. The third chapter or argument I'd like to make of the component of generative urban intelligence is how it processes reframe design as an evolving process of collaboration between the human capacity for intelligence, computational systems, and machine learning. My interests in recent couple of years, few years, 5 years or so, have evolved from computational design towards a kind of human to AI co-creation, where design emerges through iterative dialogue, exploration, and shared agency. John Fraser in the mid-90s, in his really seminal book, published by AA Publications, titled An Evolutionary Architecture, wrote, "The emphasis shifts in his time from the design of form to the design of the process which generates form." And I think this is truly a prescient statement within a kind of larger text, where he was less interested in the direct creation of form, but rather the design of systems that are able to create the kind of formal logic of projects and the outcomes of design. At the AADRL, where I taught from 97 to 2009 and co-directed from 2004 to 2009, we developed, from 2004 to 2009, the media of computation applied towards urbanism, developing also diagrammatic modes of capturing the dynamism of the media that we were working with, either through very literally animate media, and also the capacity to describe that animate media as having potentially a formal logic. I'm not going to show sort of much of this work, but I think the mode of seriality and of evolutionary logic was very much at play. Also backing up to procedurally or process-wise to an exhibition project titled The Parametric Pearl River Delta in the Hong Kong Shenzhen Biennale in 2010. We developed a back-end grasshopper model that in the exhibition, in the exhibition we had a front-end interface that the users of of the mouse, let's say, and the screen. We're working with moving sliders with various kinds of parameters, very simple. The model was very simple. But this, to me, was a first instance where we developed a mode in which the user could design their own city, albeit very simplistically. The reason it was simplistic formally was the model would crash if it was at all a more complex formal arrangement. So then we took the same notion of seeds and relationships in space, programmatically, density, typology, and worked through scripting, a mode in which the variation of form and the kind of formal logic of space could be demonstrated more explicitly. Shortly after that, we developed some of these scripts to work from the notion of standardization and repetition towards increasingly inventive, plastic, and malleable formal arrangements. And this era of working computationally and looking at variation, I think, is a background to the mode in which a more generative urbanism is set within. The notion of a script or a particular code that can produce a multiplicity of outcomes, back to John Fraser, where we design the system that designs form rather than designing form. And I think that in the context of working with generative AI in this workshop here at Digital Futures, this work to me is very much about designing that system, and now we have diffusion models that we're working with, albeit in 2D, and I think we're not far off from the potential of truly working in 3D and generative AI. In an invited competition in Osaka in 2013-14, we developed some of these notions of how the model can produce a multiplicity of outcomes, and rather than proposing a single, beautifully rendered project, we presented one rendering and one plan just so that it can be comprehensible. But the project was effectively about developing a system that had as inputs various kinds of, I don't know if my mouse will show this, probably not, no, my mouse doesn't show it, a range of programmatic inputs that are differentiated across the 6 models, a range of public and private landscapes and different extensive landscapes. And effectively, this is to develop a manifold of possible future scenarios and configurations for a site. And these 6 zoning scenarios each outline a varied mix of programmatic ratios and relationships of landscape, each with a density and a typology of architectural mass associated to it. And here are the 6 in more detail, cycling through them. Underneath this, or in the back end, are some patterns that structure the ground and the organization of form, which I won't go through and show much of this. But it also is a background in a way to the work that we're doing here in 2D. At NYIT, I'll show a project later, but I'd like to just show a matrix of a project organization working within generative AI, a series of different media. This is about a 3-year-old project, a 1-semester MS in urban design project, going from a series of a database of cities that I continue to work with, and eventually having more inputs from Hong Kong, blue and green spaces, which are codified, of course, as water and green space, and eventually leading towards models from those 2D, and literally hundreds of patterns and maybe 100 sample models were produced, to eventually come towards also using generative AI to describe a series of islands. This was for a project for the East Lantau metropolis. Now, at the time, it was a live project in Hong Kong, which was dropped by the Hong Kong government, and instead they're building the northern metropolis near the boundary with Shenzhen, which is probably more sensible and ecologically sound. Here at Digital Futures, we worked in 2023 and also now on a similar sort of process of and sequence of media, from generative AI and patterns to models, 3D prints, and renderings. And that we'll see in about, I guess, 5 days' time. This is some of the work from 2023, going from 2D patterns to 3D models, and then one model developed in greater detail. And this series, we're working in a similar process and focusing more of our week on 3D printing and AR rendering. I believe is a clunky and awkward stage of the evolutionary of the technologies, and I truly look forward to the time, perhaps in 3, 5, 10 years. I'm not sure when. The problem of the 3D generative AI model will arise. I have some colleagues and friends who are far more technically invested trying to work on the problem of 3D generative AI, and I think that it's not too far off. In terms of processes, I'd like to show one exhibition project where we experimented with the capacity to capture the city and capture properties of the city through photogrammetry models. These are 3 parts of Hong Kong: Wafu Estate, Pok Fulam Village, and Aberdeen Harbour. Photogrammetry models are capturing pixels with color information in space and creating a model that looks also somewhat photographic, all done through drones. They're a little bit grainy because they capture only so much information. We also worked with photography and drones, capturing these 3 sites. And heat sensors, recording the temperature of what's being mapped underneath, and also the topography of these 3 sites. And I think these processes are in relation to the kind of notion of generative urbanism. It enables us to engage and capture with existing space and treat it as a model, as photographic, and also through video. Click. Yeah. So we captured a series of videos. I think this is a bit heavy. It's not. Huh? Sorry, it's a bit heavy. It's frozen. Aye. Apologies for this. Hey, it's frozen. It's a big video. It worked earlier. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, we also focused on trying to capture through, I show this work because not so much that it was drone technology and such, but the relevance to a kind of generative urbanism is we captured the qualities of these three sites and began to model them and looked at topographies around those three sites and developed a kind of language of how the architecture inhabits and is able to populate those three sites, not looking like the three, but a mode in which we generated a kind of new formal logic from the properties that were captured, different scales, and tried to integrate the three in a generative mode. This was the exhibition first presented at the Seoul Biennale and also then later exhibited in New York. The final chapter or argument I'd like to make is how prototypes are not simply representations of future projects. They're also laboratories for experimentation, speculation, and learning. In architecture and urbanism, prototyping enables us to test ideas, embrace productive failure, and imagine alternative futures before they become reality. The emphasis... sorry, I had another quote. I think we can look at the notion of the prototype through the action of prototyping, which I think goes back to the 20th century with figures like Buckminster Fuller, who's devoted his entire career to developing the geodesic dome. Most often, this is the image we see of the Montreal Expo, the biggest dome he ever did. But he worked on well over 25 other domes. At least half of them collapsed and failed. And he scaled them up and developed techniques through the notion of learning from failure. The pavilion is often a scale of experimentation, limited that it's not yet fully architectural, but it's a scale which enables us to prototype ideas that could then be rolled out at a larger scale. This is Thomas Heatherwick's, the largest project he had built at that stage. He was also not an architect, but then since has built tons of architecture. And at the AA, in the final cycle of students before I moved to Hong Kong at Hong Kong U, one of the activities we did that year was to take a material of 13 millimeter fiber reinforced concrete and develop a prototype in the middle here as a 1 to 10 scale model that worked and debugged some of the problems, and we built a pavilion as a prototype, and it was installed for several months in Bedford Square in London outside of the AA. Prototypes such as Grammatio in Colors, robotic brick wall at the Venice Biennale in 2008, I think, was a prototype for them to build larger scale architecture of walls at the scale of envelopes much later. The notion of the prototype in a studio as a visiting professor at UPenn some years ago, the fabrication lab became the kind of studio where we developed lots of models at different scale, kind of overall site models, more detailed models, larger scale, smaller scale, architectural models, more abstract models, being very promiscuous of the combination of different kinds of media, materials, and machining. In terms of architectural prototypes, this is maybe where I'll show some of the work of two books that came out of a seminar that I've run at New York Institute of Technology, a graduate seminar for the last 6 years. the first 3 years produced of a seminar called Beyond the Envelope, produced a book of interviews and diagrams by students, post-produced, and the more recent seminar on ground. So in Beyond the Envelope, focused on architectural envelopes and their contribution to architectural discourse, with 34 students across 3 cycles of this seminar. We looked at 21 pioneering buildings as really architectural prototypes in the 21st century. And we interviewed their architects. We began the seminar during 2020, during the pandemic, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to interview the architects of our first 6 projects, and these were the 3. Those interviews included Philip Yuan and a project by Archi Creation. And because it was the pandemic in 2021, fall 2021, spring 2021, everybody was still at home and working remotely, and everybody said yes to the invitation to be interviewed. The following 2 years, my dean, Maria Perbolini, asked that we would do this as a public event series, where we would pre-cook questions and ask the architect in a Zoom call that was publicly part of our series. By that, we were no longer remote, but it was a way of connecting to these fantastic architects and asking about their projects, focusing on the envelope as a site of inquiry, more than facades. Envelopes describe social and culture and economic and technological conditions of the times of their making. And the book examined how these envelopes serve as environmental moderators, cultural artifacts, and the particular aesthetic expressions and technical achievements. So the seminar was sort of focused on practice-based, design-based, or project-based research as these projects. And we analyzed the projects and investigated them through 6 themes: form, matter, identity, environment, experience, and interaction. And the interview was a methodology of interrogating the projects and the maker of the projects, the architect. And an open-ended format of the interview allowed for the discussion of challenges, the intentions of the project, unforeseen discoveries in the project, nuances, gossip, all sorts of stuff. The Pond Society, the Chisha building by Archi Creation, Philip Yuan's office. The diagrams are by the students in the seminar. I'll show just one other quick one. Lisa Soho, which we saw presented so truly beautifully in a wonderful presentation by Satoshi Ohashi a couple of days ago. And this was with Patrick Schumacher, the interview. And the last 3 years of On Ground examined the evolving relationship between architecture and the ground through 48 seminal projects, and in the book, 13 critical essays. And emerging from the same graduate seminar, the book combines analytical drawings, historical inquiry, critical essays, and project-based research, reconsidering architecture's disciplinary and material foundations. There's the cover, some of the projects in the book. And the book is framed through lenses of politics, ecology, mobility, and tectonics. And the book challenges the notion of the ground as a neutral surface, instead positioning it as a dynamic field of negotiation, mediation, and transformation. In the 4 chapters, the projects in the first chapter, Politics, examines how architecture engages the ground as a contested, political space, organizing public space, mediating access, structuring collective experience across civic and institutional and cultural contexts. Through formal, spatial, and tectonic strategies, the projects communicate political intent, they negotiate power and identity, they demonstrate architecture's capacity to instigate civic and urban transformation. The essays in this first chapter reposition the ground as a political and computational and ideological construct, advancing new understandings of architecture's agency in shaping collective life, territorial power, and environmental governments in the civic realm. The projects, Parent Virilio in France, Niemeyer in Paris, Frei Otto at the Munich Stadium, Centre Pompidou by Rogers and Piano, the Jewish Museum by Liebeskind, Museum of Contemporary Art, Parliament of Scotland by EMBT, Yad Vashem by Safdie, Oslo Opera House by Snøhetta, the Louvre Abu Dhabi by Jean Nouvel, V&A Dundee by Kuma. And the projects in ecology, the second chapter, reposition the ground as a living ecological medium where landscape operates as environmental media integrating topography, hydrology, climate, material performance, and negotiating between the notions of artificiality and nature. The projects in this chapter advance notions of regenerative and climate responsive architecture, engaging biodiversity, ecological processes, resilience as fundamental project drivers. The essays here extend ecological thinking beyond sustainability, proposing new models of living systems, regenerative design, biological intelligence, and AI-mediated environmental practice, collectively repositioning architecture within planetary processes. The projects in this chapter include Arcos Santi by Soleri, Arcos Fukuoka by Mbaz, Chichu Museum by Ando, the Vanke Headquarters by Stephen Hull, the Interlace by OMA and Ola Shirin, Yanweizhou Park by Turinscape, the Pan-Pacific Orchard Building by Woha in Singapore, 56 Leonard Street by Herzog Demeron, Copenhagen Power Plant by Big, the Chapel of Sound by Open Architecture, Little Island by Heatherwick, the Asian Games by Winka Doubledum. And lastly, the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, finished this year by MAD. And so the third chapter in mobility reconceived the ground as a performative infrastructural field, shaping movement, connectivity, and relationships between architecture and the wider urban network. Through gradients of surface, thresholds, and circulation systems and spatial sequences, these projects choreograph flows of people, information, and activity, transforming mobility into an architectural and urban design medium. The essays in this chapter reconceive the ground as an adaptive, networked, and programmable medium, exploring how mobility, digital infrastructures, ecological systems, and responsive technologies have the capacity to transform architecture into an evolving field of dynamic relationships and flows. We start with the Carpenter Center by Corbusier, Berlin Free University, the Kunsthal Rotterdam by OMA, the Eden Project by Grimshaw, the Perot Museum of Nature and Science by Morphosis, the Kaiha Forum, Arnhem Station by UN Studio, West Village by Jiakun Architects, and the Matt Building by ALA, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture by Ajayi Associates. The projects in the final chapter, Tectonics, investigate how material systems, geometry, computation, and fabrication are redefining architecture's relationship to the ground through innovation in structure, surface, and construction. Tectonics emerges in our contemporary field as both material and computational intelligence, where performance, expression, and the convergence of digital and physical processes reshape the agency of architecture. The essays in tectonics propose an expanded tectonic paradigm in which material intelligence, computational design, AI fabrication, and temporal adaptation converge, redefining architecture as an emergent, performative, and continuously evolving system. The projects in this final chapter, the Whitney Museum of Art, the Étoile-d'Ivry, a wonderfully wild project, Villa VPRO by MDRDV, FOA's Yokohama project, the Mercedes-Benz Museum by UN Studio, BMW World by Coop Himmelblau, the Rolex Learning Center by Sana, Toshima Art Museum, a City of Culture of Galicia by Eisenman Architects, the Metropole Parasol, and the DDP by ZHA, and Fondation Louis Vuitton by Gary, and the Key Quarter Tower by 3XN. It was worked on together with my research assistant and former student, Kaylee Trentadue, and the various essay authors who contributed to the book, including Sanford Quinter, Caroline Boss, Peter Anker, and Matthias Del Campo, and Sandro Maniger, and several others. Just briefly to conclude, I'm coming close to, or maybe even overtime. I'm sorry about that. Urban prototypes. One of the most influential on myself was the Expo 67 in my home city in Montreal. Several of the pavilions remained, Bucky Fuller's Dome and a few others. So in my childhood, they were influential to guide me towards a selection of architecture as a future career. And I think that there are a series of urban prototypes that are quite worrying these days. The notion of freedom cities, Forever California, envisioned by Apple, not yet built. And as Neil Leach talks about the way that AI will be embedded into the city, that we won't notice that it's being embedded because it'll look like the old city. Forever California is bizarrely pedantic. The Freedom City of the Toyota Woven City near Mount Fuji in Japan. It's a built prototype with autonomous vehicles, robotics, and smart infrastructure. The Xiong'an New Area in Beijing. It's a state-led prototype as a model for smart, green, and innovation-driven urban development. Sidewalk Labs, some of them aren't so worrying. Maybe Sidewalk Labs is less worrying. A subsidiary of Google Alphabet, of a smart district in Toronto's waterfront. Of course, it was dropped. It wasn't built. This is built for a city in Malaysia, very much a kind of vertical green eco-city, so-called, maybe because it's just covered in green. The unbuilt Tolosa city that is being planned in Northern California, and Prosper in Honduras, which exemplifies the Freedom City model of privatized urban development as an enclave with its own government and regulatory framework, promoting really a kind of libertarian economic model. And the line in Saudi Arabia, which is now on hold for the next 4 years, represents an extreme vision of the Freedom City model, an entirely privatized and master planned urban project governed by corporate and state interests. I'd like to just end with an urban prototype of a project from a recent studio at NYIT. The project titled Feeding the Bronx developed an urban prototype of the capacity to feed a district of the Bronx of approximately 15,000 people with hydroponic farming over the Cross Bronx Expressway. The urban studio analyzed all kinds of demographic, ecological, infrastructural information, and we engaged in a kind of mapping at the scale of the Cross-Bronx Expressway, of the Bronx, of a series of sites on the Bronx, and deciding which would be best. And finding the notion of the food desert of the most impoverished of the boroughs of New York City, and then developing through generative AI, both in planimetrically and in section, a sectional project that would span the Cross-Bronx Expressway and cap it over to build a facility of hydroponic farming, and lots of other food-related programs as a prototype for urban development. And to conclude this thesis on generative urban intelligence, I think generative urban intelligence is ultimately less about automation and efficiency than it is about the augmentation and acceleration, expanding our capacity to perceive patterns, imagine alternatives, and prototype possible futures. We've entered an era in which new computational tools and emerging worldviews are as exciting as they are revolutionary, transforming not only how we design architecture and urbanism, but how we understand intelligence, creativity, and our collective responsibility for shaping urban futures. Lastly, I'd like to thank again Yan Chia for the introduction, and to Philip Yuan and Tongji University for the generous invitation to join Digital Futures and to speak with you tonight. Thank you for being here.